The backyard was quiet that evening, just the way I like it. The old oak near the fence had finally filled back in after the ice storm 2 winters ago, and the fireflies were starting to come out early. I was sitting on the porch with a glass of iced tea, watching the light go orange over the roofline, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from my son-in-law. Thought you should know. Ran into your brother at the hardware store today. He was telling someone you finally had to move in with family. Said you never recovered. Said some people just don't have it in them. I read it twice. Set the phone face down on the armrest. Picked up my tea. He wasn't wrong that I'd moved, but the rest of it, the part about not recovering, about not having it in me, I suppose that's the story he needed to tell himself. People do that. They build a version of you that makes their own choices feel justified, and then they defend that version like it's the truth. My brother's name is Conrad. He's 4 years younger than me, which means he's 61 now. And I say that because he doesn't look it. He's always been the one people noticed first. Better posture. Louder laugh. The kind of man who makes a room feel like it belongs to him the moment he walks in. We grew up in Dayton, Ohio. 2 boys, working-class family. Father worked the line at a GM plant until his knees gave out. Mother kept the house and kept the peace and kept us fed on less money than anyone should have to manage. We were close when we were young, the way brothers are when they don't have anything else, and they don't know yet how much that will matter later. The trouble started the way trouble always starts in families, slowly. Then all at once, when our father passed, this was about 12 years ago now, he left the 2 of us the house on Elm Fork Road. It wasn't worth a fortune, but it was something. A corner lot, 3 bedrooms, the detached garage where he used to spend his Sunday afternoons. My mother had been in a memory care facility for 2 years by then, and the plan, what we had agreed on, what I had put in writing and sent to my brother and his wife, was that we would sell the house together, split the proceeds, and use part of my share to help cover my mother's costs. Conrad had other ideas. I found out from the attorney, not from my brother, from a stranger in a suit, that Conrad had taken out a line of credit against the property 6 months before my father died. He'd used the house as collateral without telling me, without my signature, and when I asked him how that was possible, the attorney explained carefully that my father had signed something during a period when his health was already declining. I don't know what my brother told him. I don't know how that conversation went. I have tried many times not to picture it. The house sold. Conrad got most of it. I got what was left after the credit line was satisfied, which was less than 1/3 of what I should have received. I had a lawyer look at it. She was honest with me. She said we could pursue it, but the signature was my father's, and proving undue influence was going to be expensive, slow, and painful, and even if we won, the money would likely go to legal fees. I asked her what she would do if it were her family. She looked at me for a long moment and said, I'd decide what I could live with. I decided I could live without the fight. What I couldn't live with was letting it take the rest of my life with it. I want to be honest about that period, because it wasn't graceful. I was 63 years old, newly retired from 31 years in commercial insurance. I'd been a regional manager for a mid-sized firm out of Columbus, and suddenly I was doing the math on my savings in a way I hadn't expected to be doing it. My wife Helen had passed 4 years earlier, breast cancer, fast-moving, cruel the way fast-moving things are cruel. We'd planned retirement together, done the spreadsheets, picked the places we'd drive to, argued pleasantly about whether to go to Portugal or New Mexico first. I was doing that planning alone now, and the shortfall my brother had created was real. Not catastrophic. I want to be clear, I was not destitute. But the cushion I'd counted on was gone, and at 63, you start to feel the edges of things more than you used to. My daughter Renee lived in Asheville, North Carolina by then. She'd moved there with her husband after he took a position managing a construction firm. They had a good-sized property on the edge of town, old farmhouse they'd spent 5 years renovating, and she called me one Sunday and said, "Dad, just come. Stay for a while. Figure things out from here." I'll admit I resisted. I was born in the Midwest. I'd spent my whole life in Ohio. There is a particular stubbornness that comes with being from a place, a reluctance to let any circumstance push you out of the geography that formed you. But I was also tired, and Renee had always been the person in my life who told me the truth without cruelty. And so in October, I packed what fit in my car, and I drove south. That was 3 years ago. I want to tell you what those 3 years looked like, because that's the part Conrad didn't know. That's the part he couldn't have known, because I didn't talk about it. I've never been a person who announces what he's building while he's still building it. My father was like that too. He used to say, "Don't talk about the crop before the harvest." I thought it was just an old-fashioned expression when I was young. I understand now it was a philosophy. When I got to Asheville, I stayed in Renee's guest room for about 3 weeks, long enough to get my bearings, short enough that I didn't let myself settle into helplessness. I took walks every morning. I learned the town. I went to the library. I sat in on a couple of free seminars at the senior center, one on woodworking, one on financial planning for retirees, not because I needed to, but because I needed something to do with my mornings that wasn't sitting in a chair feeling sorry for myself. The financial planning seminar is where I met a man named Archie, who ran a small property management business and was looking for someone with administrative experience to help him manage the back end, leases, contractors, insurance, owner communication. It was exactly the kind of work I'd spent 30 years doing, scaled down to something human-sized. He offered me part-time to start. I said yes before he finished the sentence. Within 6 months, I'd also started consulting independently for 2 small businesses in town, a flooring company and a family-owned hardware store, helping them with their commercial insurance needs. Not a full career, not what I'd had in Columbus, but real work, meaningful work, work that used what I knew. I was also doing something else. Quietly, without discussing it with anyone except Renee and her husband, I had been in contact with a real estate attorney and a buyer's agent, looking at small properties in the area, not large, not fancy, just something mine. I found it 14 months after I arrived in Asheville. A single-story house on a half-acre lot on the eastern side of town, close enough to Renee that I could walk to her place for dinner and far enough that we both kept our privacy. The previous owners had taken good care of it. Hardwood floors throughout, an updated kitchen, a covered back porch that ran the full width of the house, and a detached workshop in the back that I suspect was built by someone who loved what I love. I made an offer. It was accepted. I closed on a Thursday afternoon, shook the attorney's hand, and drove to the property alone, and sat in the driveway for about 20 minutes. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there. There's something about acquiring something real at 64, something that belongs to you, that you paid for from your own account, that no one handed to you and no one can take with a signature, that is difficult to explain to someone who hasn't needed it. It felt, and I know this sounds plain, like proof, not to anyone else, to myself. That what had been taken from me was not the last word on what I was capable of. I didn't tell Conrad. I didn't send a message. I didn't post anything online. I went in and I started learning my new house, room by room, the way you do when you're new somewhere, finding where the light falls in the afternoon, learning which floorboards creak, figuring out how the water pressure runs. I put up a bird feeder in the back. I bought a second-hand workbench for the workshop. I made a list of small repairs and I worked through it over several weekends. That was my life. That was what Conrad was calling not recovering. The reunion that changed things happened in May, about 8 months after I'd moved in. Renee and her husband hosted a cookout for Memorial Day weekend, and the guest list was a mix of their friends and family, including some cousins from my father's side whom I hadn't seen in years, a few of my old colleagues from Ohio who had made the drive, and, because Renee still believes in the possibility of peace between people, my brother and his wife. I knew Conrad was coming. Renee had told me. She'd asked if that was all right, and I'd told her it was. Because it was, I had nothing left to be angry about, or, rather, I had made a choice not to carry that anger into the time I had left, and I mostly kept that promise to myself. Conrad arrived with his wife an hour into the party. He looked good. He always looks good. He had a new truck, I noticed, parked out front. He found me by the back fence where I was talking to one of the cousins, and he did the thing he always does when he knows he's wronged someone and can't say so directly. He was very warm, handshakes and backslaps and a lot of, "There he is," and "Good to see you, man." We talked for a few minutes about nothing. Weather. The drive down. Whether the cousins had changed much, his wife was pleasant to me, as she always has been. I don't think she knows the full story. Or perhaps she does, and she's made her own peace with it. Then one of the cousins asked how we were both doing, generally. Life update kind of question. And Conrad answered first. He said he'd had a great year. New truck, just back from a cruise, looking at a vacation property in the Smoky Mountains. Then he turned to me with a particular kind of look. Not cruel, but knowing, the look of a man who has already decided the punchline and said, "And you're living out here now? Staying with Renee." He said it like a kindness, like he was acknowledging my situation gently, in company, so that no one would have to feel awkward about it. I said, "No, I've got a place of my own now. About 2 miles east." He blinked. "A rental?" "No," I said. "Mine." There was a brief pause. Not dramatic, just the small silence that follows when a person's assumptions are reorganized. His wife said, "Oh, how nice. What's it like?" And I said it was a single story with a big back porch and a workshop I'd been getting into, and that the neighborhood was quiet, and the neighbors were good people. I didn't say what I'd paid for it. I didn't say how I'd managed it. I didn't give him anything to calculate against. I just described my house the way anyone describes their home when they're asked, like it's simply where they live. The cookout went on. We moved around. The food was good. Renee made her potato salad, which has been a point of family-wide agreement for 30 years, and someone brought a strawberry pie that disappeared in about 11 minutes. I sat with the cousins for a long stretch, and it was the comfortable conversation of people who knew each other in childhood, and have earned the right to be honest with each other. Late in the afternoon, Conrad found me again at the porch steps. He said, "How'd you manage that? The house, I mean." "I didn't think." He stopped. Reconsidered. "I just didn't realize you were doing so well." I looked at him for a moment. The light was going long and gold the way it does on spring evenings in the mountains, and I was 66 years old, standing on my daughter's porch, and my brother was asking me how I had managed to survive what he had done to me. I said, "I worked." He nodded slowly, the way men nod when they don't know what to say and can't admit it. I said, "I've always worked, Conrad. You just never noticed it when it wasn't useful to you." He didn't answer that. He looked at the yard for a moment, and then he went back to find his wife, and we didn't speak again before he left. I stayed until the end. Helped Renee fold up the folding chairs and bring the platters in. Talked to her husband about the workshop, because he'd been eyeing it since I mentioned it, and he wanted to know what tools I had. We made a loose plan for him to come over the following weekend and see the setup. Driving home that evening, it was about 7:30, still some light left. I-26 was thin with traffic, and I thought about what I wanted to feel. Not triumph. That's not the word. Not vindication, either, exactly. Something quieter than both of those. Something closer to completeness. I had come to Asheville with less than I should have had. I had not asked anyone to pity me for it. I had not taken my brother to court, not because I was afraid of him, not because I lacked the spine for it, but because I understood that a courtroom would cost me time and peace and health that I could spend differently. I had weighed what I had left, which was experience, discipline, and enough sense to know what I was good at, and I had used it. The house was mine. The work was mine. The years ahead of me were mine, which is not nothing at 66. It is, in fact, quite a lot. There are people who spend everything they have proving a point to someone who wronged them. I understand that impulse. I have felt it. On more than one occasion, usually late at night, I had thought about what it would look like to fight Conrad publicly, to let all those cousins and old friends know exactly what had happened with my father's house, to refuse to sit at the same cookout and eat potato salad and act like we were ordinary brothers. I could have done any of that. But I had looked at what I wanted the back half of my life to look like, and none of those things were in the picture. What was in the picture was the covered porch on a weekday morning with coffee, the workshop on a Saturday, dinner at Renee's when I wanted company and quiet, at home when I didn't, work that used my mind without consuming my soul, the slow, low-stakes pleasure of knowing where my money was and where it was going, and that it was enough. That is what Conrad saw, or the edge of it, when he heard the word mine. The thing about a man who takes from you is that he imagines afterward that he has defined you, that the taking was the final word. He goes on with his life carrying the story of your diminishment, because that story is the thing that makes what he did feel like something other than theft. What he does not account for is the part that comes after. The quiet part, the part where you're not looking at him at all. I got home that night, pulled into my own driveway, sat for a minute the way I always do, just to feel it. The house was dark inside because I hadn't left a light on. I could see the workshop shape in the back through the car window, and the old apple tree at the edge of the lot that I hadn't done anything with yet, but kept thinking about. I had plans. Nothing dramatic. Just plans. I went inside, put the kettle on, and stood at the kitchen window while the water heated, looking out at the backyard in the last of the evening light. My father used to say something else besides the crop and the harvest. He'd say, "The best answer to a man who counts you out is to still be standing when he runs out of things to count." I'm still standing. That's all. That's the whole story. I think about my father's hands a lot these days. Rough hands, careful hands, the kind that came from decades of doing the same honest work without complaint and without applause. He never talked about what he deserved. He just showed up, and he kept showing up, and at the end of it, he had a house and 2 sons and a life he could look at straight. I don't know if I understood what that cost him until I had to build something of my own from a smaller pile than I'd expected. What Conrad did was wrong. I've stopped softening that. He used our father's declining mind to secure something that belonged to both of us, and then he let me find out from a stranger in a suit. That is a moral failure, not a miscommunication, not a gray area, not a family disagreement that reasonable people can see differently. It was a choice made in private that he has never directly acknowledged. I made peace with the fact that he probably never will. But here is what I've come to understand about that kind of wrong. It reveals character on both sides. His choice told me who he is when the stakes are real. My response told me who I am. I chose not to spend my remaining years in a courtroom or in bitterness, and that wasn't weakness. It was a calculation I made with clear eyes about what I valued, more than being right in public. That kind of clarity is something I had to earn. It didn't come naturally. It came from sitting in a guest room in Asheville at 63 years old, doing the math on what I had left, and deciding, deliberately, what I was going to do with it. I had the knowledge from 31 years of professional work. I had the discipline to get up every morning and take a walk, even when I didn't feel like it. I had enough self-honesty to know that self-pity was a bill I couldn't afford to run up. I used what I had. I found Archie. I found the consulting work. I found the house. None of it came quickly. None of it came easily. But it came because I kept my head down and kept moving. And because I refused to let someone else's assessment of my situation become my own. Renee never said, "I told you so," when things started to turn around. She's not that kind of person. She just made room for me when I needed it, and then trusted me to find my own footing. That kind of love, quiet, practical, non-dramatic, is the kind that actually holds a person up. I hope I told her that well enough. The moment at the cookout when Conrad asked, "How did you manage this?" I've thought about it more than I probably should. What I heard underneath the question wasn't curiosity, it was recalculation. He had built a version of my story in his mind, where I was the ending he expected, and that version had just failed to load. I don't take pleasure in that, not exactly. But I won't pretend it meant nothing to me either. What it meant was this. The years of quiet work were visible, not to him specifically. I genuinely don't care what Conrad sees when he looks at me. But visible in the way real things are visible. In the form of a house with hardwood floors and a workshop out back, and a daughter 2 miles down the road who sets a place for me at dinner. My father said the best answer to a man who counts you out is to still be standing when he runs out of things to count. I'm 66. I'm standing. That's enough.